And thank you, everyone, for having me. Well, I didn't deliver yet, so wait. It's always nice to be back at ETH, where I did my studies, where I had happy times and not so happy times, which is part of it. Let me ask you a question. Who here or whose organization is using SCION in one way or the other? Raise the hand. Now, I'd say that's probably half. The others, why not? Why?
Because it's not known enough.
It's not known enough, 1 point. Others, why not? We heard about all the advantages. You need to have reason not to use it, right? It's not necessary. Okay? Other reasons? Integration hurdles. How big are they? Are you sure? Okay, let's say big. I don't know. Other reasons? More complexity? Is it though? We don't know. That's important questions to ask. Now we have a technology here that's rather interesting. It's used in some places, yet there's some uncertainty about it. And I will come back to that, why that is important, and I would like to discuss it in more generally in challenges I see with bringing Swiss innovation forward and bringing it to a global market. Because I think the brilliance behind the things we develop is much higher than our capability to scale it to international markets. And that's part of our national strategy to think about how could we change that probably. That's been said, my name is Florian Schütz, I'm director of the National Cybersecurity Center. I'm also responsible for the implementation and the development of the Swiss national strategy. And me and my team, we are executing tasks to provide some framing conditions that allow you to be more secure and safe in cyberspace. Contrary to the military and the intelligence service, which do the defense against nation-state threats or military threats, and the cyber crime part, where it's about getting the criminals to justice. Now, we had a discussion about regulation earlier. Who here is team regulation? I can give you that. You won't like it, trust me. Not saying we don't need regulation. Let me talk briefly about regulation. What is regulation all about? Regulation, in my opinion, and I'm happy to be corrected, serves two main purposes. One is to equalize markets. If we see a market is not fair to the different vendors, for example, because a vendor not adhering to security principles and shipping a potentially dangerous product can undercut prices by large of vendors that actually take the responsibility serious. And the other one is to decrease systemic risk. And I think that's very important to ask ourselves, at least from my perspective, what's the systemic risk to Switzerland if we don't have the security promises that, for example, science makes when it comes to routing? Now, that's not an easy question to answer, right? Second part, when we talk about regulation, is we quite often think about regulation, we pass it, and then it's there, right? And I had the pleasure to work in Germany, and I'd like to give you one example why this can be a very limiting view. We had iPhones as a company phone, which is nice, and you get a charger with your iPhone. Now this charger has a CE label, right? Otherwise, it's can't be used. Now, the thing is, regulation also says if you're a company, to avoid a fire hazard, you need to verify that one charger every year. So every year, a team would go around to every desk, check whether the charger is really a company charger, which has the sticker on it, test it, see is the voltage is still the same, recertify it. That costs a lot of money, right? Now the question is, where does it make sense and where doesn't it make sense? And where do we need it? And why I'm talking about it here. Just this morning I had a meeting where we discussed how could we actually increase the resiliency in cybersecurity in Switzerland. And one of the topics was, well, we could basically say you need to take care that your product doesn't contain that many vulnerabilities. And if it has vulnerabilities and they get known, they actually get fixed. Who do you think was in favor of working on a balancing system where we say, okay, maybe we need to regulate a little bit because of market access, because someone might just say, I'm not caring, and actually saying, okay, here, that's probably not critical. It's not a controller in a power plant. We don't need to have that thoroughly looked at. It's maybe more an application that allows you to catalog your wine, and maybe there we just encourage it. What do you think was the result of the discussion? What were the key critics? Sorry?
Technology.
Technology? Well, I wasn't a room full of people that understand technology, to be fair. Cost, yes. Others? Other ideas? Effort, markets, speed, adoption, efficiency. There were many things. There were like, okay, this is going to cost us a lot of money. Yes, maybe. But what does it cost us if we don't do it? Do you know how much money we lose with every cyber incident that hits our economy? I don't. And that's a problem. We need to get these figures, right? But I know we have 10 to 20 critical infrastructures that my team works with every day because they're currently victim of an attack. Now, of course, one event goes a little longer, so it's not 20 every day new ones, but it is 20 on average that we have critical infrastructure. And we know that the loss is usually, if you calculate everything, in the ballpark of, well, smaller one, 500,000 up to 60, 70, 100 million, right? Now let's take that cost together and let's think about how could we invest that? How could we actually prevent problems when we put that money at work? How much of that money do we need to put at work? And then maybe adoption cost of new technology suddenly isn't that high anymore. Now there's a problem. Who should make that calculation? On a national level, I think it's our responsibility and we need to get there. We're not doing good enough yet. And yes, I'm trying hard to fix that. Give me a little bit of time, please. But the other thing is, if you're a vendor, and I see that quite often with startups in Switzerland that have new technology, they're excellent at explaining you the technology. They're not really good at telling you what does it cost you to implement it, what does it cost to adapt it, but what do you actually save downstream? Or how much do you have to spend more downstream, but how does it affect risk? And I do think we need to get better. While we have a rather behaved market in Switzerland, where there is some fairness applied, from my international experience, I can tell you, other companies will eat you for breakfast. They don't care telling the truth. They don't care really whether your product is superior. They will throw whatever it needs to get the market. They will invest more money. They will sue you. They will claim that your security guarantees aren't. That's a difficult, tough one, right? So you need to be able to make the business case. And I see a lot of startups struggling. Now, I heard Anapaya is doing great with that, so that's sure just an information gap. The second thing is when we look at challenges, why new technology, especially from new companies, isn't quickly adopted. And I know that, for example, with SCION and Anapaya, that phase already is behind them, is how can you actually prove that you're sustainable? How can you prove if you go out of business, as a client, your clients aren't sitting on a technology that they can't use anymore? So you need some guarantees. You need someone who maybe maintains the technology if you fail. I think 80% of the startups fail. It's a high number, right? That's another one. And then the question is, when we have key technologies that could actually help us to set an international standard, is that purely an economic responsibility, or is there a state responsibility in helping to achieve these goals, in helping to have market access quickly? Because no one is gonna, or very little companies, are gonna buy from you if you're not successful in your own market. But if your market is hard because you hear all the time, well, it's not yet a well-established international technology, what is your client base, where are you? That's a really tough environment to be in. And I think, and I want to be critical about our own work, we're not yet great at adapting new technologies, especially also on a administrative level, right? I mean, what would it cost us to adapt a new technology and it fails? That's a zero-sum game. We take taxpayers' money, we invest it back in the market of a Swiss company, the money is back in there, it failed, not too bad, right? But if it is successful, there's an upside potential. So I do think we should not only talk about how important the technology is, but also how can we adapt it, how can we test it in harsh environments, like, for example, the Cyber Defense Campus does in a test setup, in a live environment, where can we contribute? There's a third concern from my point of view. Let's say we have an interesting technology like SCION. Let's say the company is super successful. And also the technology is used within our critical infrastructure, within our military networks, within our e-government services. What happens to companies that are attractive? They get bought, right? Is that likely a Swiss big player that's buying them? Maybe not. Should you blame the owners of a company if they sell to a foreign entity? No, I mean, it's business. Let's be absolutely clear, right? So the question is, how can we actually get national interest through? And I think we don't often enough talk about market dynamics, especially when it comes to cybersecurity innovation and products, where we say, okay, how can we maintain some sort of control from a government level if we like it? I mean, we could just buy it, right? Well, unfortunately, no, we're not allowed to. But I do think that are big topics that if we could clarify them, can help new technology and new technology companies to have an easier life. And we know in other markets this is done. I had an interesting meeting in France with my counterpart, and they have an interesting model. They want to build up the domestic industry. Now, why do they want to do that? What do you think? More control? Sovereignty, exactly. That's the point. Now, problem is that's not how things were built. In the past, many of the supply chains were built on a global level under the premise that globalization will lead to more stability because no one has an interest to attack the supply chains. I'm oversimplifying, but we see that very, very well when we look at the chip industry. Now, the problem is geopolitics has changed. We see a regionalization of efforts. We see a clash of value systems that are regionally rooted. And so in order to become more independent of global supply chains and being more capable to exercise conflict, you need a certain sovereignty. So there is an interest to have own development capabilities and an own industry. Now, don't get me wrong, this will never be, in my opinion, I once learned never say never, but I'm pretty sure about this one. This will never be that Switzerland just produces all their IT goods alone and the rest of the world can do whatever they want. Interconnectivity is still a thing. There are still global markets out there. But at the same time, some critical technology, you would like to have some sort of control. Sovereignty is not about doing everything yourself, but having a certain amount of control. And France basically is giving new startups, innovating technologies, a space like office space, like coachings from companies that then get the right to purchase upfront or to make an offer for the companies upfront and so on. And the question is there, can we find a model where we can, with like-minded countries, support the development of technologies that we can trust in? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should do economics and the government will know how economics plays out best. That's not how we do it in Switzerland. That's not how I think that we should do it. But I do think we should talk about that as much in depth as we sometimes talk about regulation in the space of cybersecurity. And I had a lot of discussion with my European colleagues about NIS2. And yes, some of the aspects are really good about it. But also, sometimes it puts a burden on it. And for example, when I talked with my colleague in France, he's like, oh, you're doing this briefing for critical infrastructure every Wednesday, where you tell them about the most recent threats, about the most recent attacks. How do you do it? I said, well, it's a video call. And then we explain. And then we have a digital platform where they can ask questions afterwards. And he's like, okay, that would help us to check a box with NIS2, but we don't have that. Because so far our critical infrastructure were very limited, now it's much more, we have struggles to roll that out. So I'm saying, I think when it comes to regulation, we should think about it more dynamically, about there's a risk in the market. We should have standards, or even better, in my opinion, best practices, because best practices are elements of standards that in my book are more modular. And then, if the regulator sees risk is too high or markets aren't adapting well, then you could actually regulate that certain of these elements need to be implemented. At the same time, I'm sure that would generate an incentive where entrepreneurs that have new technology could say, okay, we see there's obviously a security concern to be addressed. We could offer a solution for that and argument along that line, and then also come and argument about compliance. Because it is very hard to sell security. And when I talked not last, but with Anapaya, with Adrian, I said, for me, there is one very important aspect about SCION that is often overlooked. And it's not the security, it's the compliance. If I can guarantee you that your data in transit never leaves our border, that's a strong claim. That's also a strong claim under the threat of encrypted traffic being stored and analyzed years later. It is a strong claim in a geopolitically more and more insecure world if I can say, I can tell you through which legislations to which different legislation your traffic goes. And I think that's also an aspect that can be solved with technology, such as SCION. That's why it is interesting, and that's why we should all work together in Switzerland, consumers, government, innovators, startups, to actually say, okay, let's think big, let's try it, let's adapt it. If it's good, it passes, and then maybe we will have another international standard from Switzerland again. The other one was made in Geneva more than 30 years ago, so I think it's time. Thank you very much.